and have them, at least form some mentorship programs.
Highlight our food systems, and which will attract persons from all over the world to come and experience something that actually supports the local economy.
We're lucky that we have a vibrant legal system that allows change to take place, and it's not that matters are just swept under the carpet and discrimination is allowed to be perpetrated.
A lot of people don't know that there were attempts to ban the carnival, suppress the carnival.
Money is something we all deal with, but how many of us truly understand it? What if you could make better decisions with your money? Decisions that secure your future, protect your family, and bring you peace of mind. I'm Darren Jacobs, and I'm here to help you make sense of your dollars. Welcome to Dollars and Cents, the show that breaks down the financial world in ways that matter to you. No jargon, no confusion, just real conversations about money, your money. So join me every Wednesday at 10 a.m. on WESN for Dollars and Cents.
Low energy? Heart concerns? Migraines slowing you down? It's time to take control of your health. Join Wellness Unlocked, the series that brings expert advice and real solutions for a healthier you. In our latest episode, learn how Jameson CoQ10 can help support heart health, boost energy, and even reduce migraines. Get the science, the stories, and the steps to power up your health with CoQ10. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and start your wellness journey today.
WESN.
Well, it's a very tiring morning for yours truly that had a very exciting night last night. Most of y'all wouldn't care. Those that watch me on the Face of Sports or know that I'm on the Face of Sports know that I follow the NFL. That's the sport I like, but also we do it on the show with Andre. My team had a big victory last night. Unfortunately, just one of those things where I normally don't try to watch the last game of the night anymore because, yeah, it pushes everything back, and then all the cleanup and everything that I had to do last night, it has left me a very happy man, but a very tired man this morning. Now, one of the things I didn't necessarily anticipate with all of that stuff going on, because I do get caught up with the NFL season on Sundays when it starts. Of course, we've been anticipating and waiting on the budget, but there was a whole other thing that happened that there've already been some interesting commentary about it, and the D word has been brought out. I guess you could say now, is this politicians kind of just copy and pasting strategies, because now we have considerations of distraction going on. And here's the thing. The budget is the real big ticket item. The cabinet reshuffle, I'll get to that because it actually happened. It's not really a reshuffle per se, but the cabinet changes, I'll get to that, it actually happened. But really and truly, regardless of how that works out with the cabinet, the real thing is the budget. Now, one economist ranks education, security, agriculture as top priorities. And the Minister of Agriculture did say, at least in his opinion, agriculture is going to be prioritized. Now, we don't necessarily know exactly what that means, prioritized, because it could mean It could mean that it's at the top of the list, or it could be that it's one of several things at the top of the list. And that's not exactly the same thing, because of course we expect health, education, and national security, as usual, to make up a significant amount of the budget. But of course, there's also tourism development, and the economists also pointed out NIS and restructuring and hopefully getting that into a healthy place. That is also something that's important, because if we just kick the can down the road with that, we would get ourselves in trouble. That could potentially upset the whole apple cart. And as we've seen with the conversations over the CPEP and URP and forestry firings and others, there is the consideration that the bottom end of the economy, where you get a lot of money moving, because a lot of the salaries paid to people in that economic bracket, they don't have, I mean, it's kind of weird, right? They don't have necessarily a lot of big mortgages and car loan payments and stuff. Some do, some don't. Some might have a mortgage or a car loan payment, right? They don't necessarily own where they're living outright. They pay rent. So the money is moving in a very real, tangible way, and it's not moving from one rich person to another rich person, so it's just an account. No, it's going from retailer to service provider to retailer to service provider to employee to retailer to service provider to employee, etc., etc. And I mean, at the end of the day, NIS, people with whatever pension schemes they have, that money is for them to live, so it's going out, not necessarily for big ticket items, but for a lot of day-to-day expenses, which keeps a significant part of the economy moving, right? When you buy a house, that money, maybe it goes to the contractor, the initial, whoever's the first owner of the house, right? Or if you buy a house from, that's an old house, it's not newly built, that money will go to the owner. Is that money going to then be spent immediately, all of it? No, a good chunk of it probably will be kept. Maybe it will go to buy another house, but then a lot of that money will only churn in the real estate market, right? Unless you do something silly like I'm selling a house to increase my bank account and I'm giving up an asset for financial liquid gains, which is not necessarily sustainable, unless, you know, you're downsizing, you're retired and you have emptiness syndrome, stuff like that. Usually, though, people want to pass down their family home, in TNT at least. It's not like America where some people go away, but a lot of people, enough stay here. So a lot of big ticket purchases will go to the big companies who will then use that money to restock or to conduct their business. It's not going to chain, you know, with mini marts and maxi taxi drivers and doubles vendors and other food retailers, other clothes retailers. Not going to chain at that level, and it might not really give us the same sort of credit creation. But okay, the thing is on this. Crime reduction, education reform, agriculture revitalization, tourism development. I don't really have a lot of confidence in tourism development. There's so many aspects that we do not have anywhere near the institutional knowledge that we should have based on history. And even agriculture, I think we have a better starting point and we have more respect for the challenges of agriculture. And even then, there are times when you kind of wonder, are we serious about agriculture? But we have a very tangible, pressing, direct need. Tourism, it's not as though you could get food from arts and culture per se, right, with food security. Or public utilities could deal with food security, right? Or Ministry of Education will have things that could help with food security. No, you need agriculture, right? Fisheries, agriculture, whether plant, animal, whatever. But tourism, well, it helps get foreign exchange, but most of the tourism product or the tourism revenue in the country, the generation that keeps the industry afloat, is domestic. That's year round. Carnival is, you know, to specific spurts. And in theory, it's supposed to get us foreign exchange, but it's not the only thing that can get us foreign exchange. And I feel that's one of the reasons why any day the main priority is going to be energy. We know it's going to be energy. The fact that Dragon, politically, the fact that the government is willing to even go there, it hasn't even been a year. So politically, I ain't going to lie, this is, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's one of the most shameless things you might see. Usually, a government is a bit more stubborn and a bit more concerned about their image, that they're like, no, we can't do a thing because there's a PNM thing and we's UNC, so we can't do it. Or we can't do a thing because we's PNM and there's UNC, so we can't do their thing. Usually politicians are, you know, it's almost like if needing to draw a line with the work of the other side is more important than actually determining whether or not to pick up the work based on merit, based on effects, effectiveness, results, right? They're that stubborn. So the fact that the current administration is like, yeah, Dragon, we could get our back, you know. Now, I think one of the real questions for this budget now, given that the murder rate is down, and I don't necessarily think that the murder rate being down, it has brought dividends in the sense of the police now have more energy and resources they could put to other crimes. I don't know if the murder rates being as low as it is something that we achieve that will be maintained or even is sustainable. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but the real catch, the real test that's being put forward now to the government is, do you take what seems to be good results, do you assume that it is long-term reality? It is not just because of the SOE and because of a few other things. Do you assume that this is something that can be sustained in the long run by the current efforts and level of resources and personnel of law enforcement in the country? And then if you believe that to be true, how much do you allocate more than normal or at all? Because you might even run into the temptation of, ooh, let's reduce national security spending, not increase it. And before the last month, 2-month period, or however long, when we really, it was really proven that month to month, the murder rate being low was a trend, was a pattern. It wasn't just a flash in the pan. Basically, for the whole year, we've seen the murder rate be lower than it usually would be, well below the average level of murders per month needed to get us to 600. So now that we could say it's not just a thing with necessarily with the SOE, because we had some time in between where murders didn't just magically spike with no SOE. The temptation of saying, well, do we really need to spend money on national security? Because before I was saying, spending money on national security, put this issue to bed. Follow up results with more results so that we could get at, because the problem is crime, it was kind of like the risk of COVID. If you lose control over the situation, then you would exponentially increase the amount of bad results you have, because it compounds itself, the amount of pressure and the lack of the amount of law enforcement capacity, criminal justice system capacity. It's not additive, it's multiplicative. Because once you start to get bottlenecks, it becomes easier and easier for criminals to exploit the fact that the system is sluggish, that the system is incapable of keeping up. So instead of doubling, it will probably quadruple. So to me, it's imperative that we don't just become complacent and say, you see, it's not really a problem anymore. Murders are only, what, 300, 400? Yeah, it's fine. That is a fine. No, that's not, first of all, that's not fine. I think 100 is still technically high, based on what I've seen. If we want to have a certain standard of quality of life when it comes to crime and suppressing crime and minimizing things like murders and unnatural loss of life. But we might get complacent in the budget. And it's not that because it's an easy decision to make, oh, well, things look better. It's because it's a hard decision to make, given all of the other financial needs. So there will be that temptation. I don't know how the budget will look. I have heard nothing. I've spoken to nobody on what government plans are. But I suspect there will be that temptation to say, well, you know, national security could hold strain. But already we're seeing issues where that is not true. And I go back to the body camera talk. So, but the problem is, for you to put more money into national security, now is the time. It's almost like if, strategically speaking, now is the time to commit when the rhetorical enemy is on the back foot, right? We need to exploit their vulnerabilities in order to put things to bed. Of course, will we ever get Mr. Biggs? And if you don't get Mr. Biggs, will it ever be permanently resolved? Probably not. Right? We'll be like Alexander watching the Persian emperor run away. But at the very least, before we even consider about trying to catch Mr. Big running away, we have to consider winning the battle in front of us right now. Right now. And we potentially have the criminal elements on a whole outflanked, right? Not necessarily outnumbered or outmanned or out-resourced, but outflanked, outmaneuvered, flat-footed, because the whole state of emergency, the Americans acting a fool, all of that, it's affecting the bottom line of the criminal element. And as I said before, there may be a world where once this drug interdiction, whether it's legal or not, goes on for too long, the local criminal element might pivot into something else. And that could lead to, depending on how professional they are, a higher murder rate or not. Now, meanwhile, the other thing about the budget is the need to really improve our unemployment and labor participation figures, just generally, right? Because we have an issue where, first of all, too many people rely on government jobs, and the main source of revenue is still technically tax revenue. So our private labor sector has been skewed due to the interference of government available jobs probably being too numerous. And it's artificially impacted the local labor market negatively. And then there's also the fact that the private sector is not really, we lack entrepreneurial spirit, we lack innovation. Yes, there will be some entrepreneurs, but as a nation, when you look at our private sector on a whole, there really is a very uninspiring overall general outlook. There's a lot of copycat behavior, and there's a lot of limitations on the avenues of what's being offered, how they're being offered, and the fact that there's certain niches you would think we should be able to make a viable customer base out of, but we don't. Part of that is it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. We can't have those things here, so we don't really have them, and we don't really try or we know how to implement them. People don't expect to have these things, so they don't seek it out. Potential customers who may want to buy whatever good it is, partake in whatever service it is, we just underestimate it. We just say, no, I wouldn't think to look for a bowling alley in TNT. We have one, apparently. We have a skating rink. These are not things traditionally that comes to my mind, because at some point, things like entertainment, different experiences, different retail offerings outside of or brand name clothing store X or budget knockoff clothing store Y, there are very little options. And the thing is, businesses are supposed to fail. And we do have some people that try to open up something and it fails. And of course, you know, not saying that you should feel normal and be unaffected when you see someone's poor hopes and dreams die. But at the end of the day, we're not necessarily seeing that sort of aggressive chain to fight to build something. It's more like, well, I have some money, let me try a thing. And when you kind of do it halfway, half aid like that, is it any wonder that a lot of projects just don't really go anywhere? And instead of allowing competition to forge our various private sector industries in the fire of, yeah, who's going to rise to the occasion, it's more like who's just going to sustain themselves and survive and be just good enough to be viable. And in some respects, that's what our politics is like as well. So, and because of that, because the private sector can't get going, we have a real big issue, I believe, with jobs. And the problem is leadership in the country, rather than trying to do things the long-term, sustainable, hard way that will give us the better results over time, the stronger foundation, more private sector job creation, a stronger private sector economy, which could help increase tax revenue, and also allow for certain functions of a society that the government might not necessarily be best to do. The government should not be the only producer of low-income housing. Because let's be real now, don't come and tell me, oh, the government will make sure that the project is on time, on budget, and done to a level of quality that is acceptable. Don't tell me that. There's nothing to say that every government housing project has any one of those three things, much less all three of those things. So as much as you could fear what the private sector may or may not do, the public sector's efforts on it leaves a lot to be desired. A lot. So there's a lot of things where it's easier to eat a food and get them a government work. You need a job, government job. It's easier to say, we have this thing, we have these two things to help people get on their feet and prepare them to go out into the workforce. And it turned into a jobs program. Our national security services, you know, this is just a random guess, but I won't be surprised if it's something like 50% are there just for a job. It's a jobs program. It's not a vocation, it's not a calling. A significant chunk of our teachers probably is the same thing. Not all, not all. It could be a minority, but I wouldn't say that it's an insignificant amount of our public sector in whatever capacity. They're just there to collect a check. And they hold the rest of the public service hostage. Because you have people in the Ministry of Health and you have people in various ministries, you know, licensing, Board of Inland Revenue, Town and Country, whatever, who are trying to be like, do the right thing in order to facilitate the needs of the people in front of them, who ironically or unfortunately, because most of the time it's the good ones potentially in front of us, because they're the ones actually willing to work, they're the ones who are going to get all of the negativity dropped on top of them. Now, the ones who working are not necessarily all perfect or all saints. But at least they're actually there to do the job. It's a hell of a thing when that's not even an automatic expectation, and we actually then expect our labor market to be healthy. So anyway, a couple other things before we just take a break quick. There was another US strike. There's two things. One, according to them, and it is possible, we just don't know, so I can't necessarily say that they are 100% right or not. They could just be blowing smoke. They have Hegseth claimed, the intelligence confirmed that the latest boat that they destroyed, was trafficking narcotics. Now again, all I'll say is, it is possible for intelligence and reconnaissance assets to do this. I'm not saying that they actually could say 100% for certain, right, that it is so. But it is possible. But the main thing that I want to point out that always comes up in these things is no U.S. forces were harmed in the operation. They always bring that up. And that's one of the reasons why I don't think regime change is necessarily on the table. Or at least it won't be done easily. Because there's that bugbear of U.S. casualties, which even this president, as gung-ho as he sounds, he seems to be, when it comes to the lives of Americans, really conservative. So That doesn't mean that he won't do it, but I do think that that is a very important thing. Politically, it's important, but also for certain politicians like him, Bush Sr., maybe even Obama, this is not one of the things that they want to see, American casualties. It's just the nature of their society right now. Gone are the days of World War II when, you know, thousands of casualties could come in from operations daily. The social media and the interconnectivity, the willingness to sacrifice on that level is not always there right now because we've had easy lives, relatively speaking. And I'll just close with this. There was a situation with a traffic stop. I find this very interesting. Essentially, police officers stopped, pulled over a driver to the left, and another car. So the police pulled over a driver. They parked their car behind the driver they pulled over. And then another vehicle rammed into the police car because he claims he could not avoid colliding with the police car because there was a car next to him. My issue is this. Why were you going that fast? Maybe I'm wrong to ask that question. Maybe there's things that weren't explained. But I do find that at the end of the day, there are people that want to drive just a little too fast on roads that you should not be racking up that speed. Because how do you then respond to what's going on? If you're in a situation where you can't avoid a collision and you can't stop, and I don't believe they were necessarily on a highway, Western Main Road, Cocorit. I understand the temptation is to treat that road like a highway, but is it really a highway where you should be driving like that? I know you're potentially coming off a Ryson Road, but still. But also the other thing is, how is it that you didn't see the police car ahead of you? Were you not paying attention? Because the person the police stopped, they stopped because they were on their cell phone. Now, this is not, you turned a blind corner and all of a sudden there was something in front of you you couldn't avoid. Western Main Road, generally you could see a ways in front of you. And somehow, everybody else avoided the police car, but you didn't? So this could be cultural. I don't know if we'll get a follow-up as to what will happen to this driver. Because again, there might be details on the situation that we don't know. But if it is how it appears, the book, this is one of those things with demerit points, definitely. If it is how it appears and there is not other details to be had. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we'll get into the whole cabinet realignment. It wasn't really a reshuffle per se. Duties, however, were swapped about. Stay tuned. This is Talking About the WSN show. Michael Small. We'll be right back after this.
Bill and Ruth fell in love with the Benjamin Moore color Dry Sage, but they tried to match it using another brand's paint.
I mean, it's close enough.
Almost identical, really. Yeah, there it is.
Never trust another paint to be a Benjamin Moore color.
My name is Dr. Stephen Carroll, the CEO at Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist, and we are committed to making good private health care affordable.
For all your medical needs, including dental, radiology, laparoscopy, behavioral and mental health, along with many other services, contact us for more information at 235-5479.
Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
where good private health care is affordable.
Feeling drained? Struggling to keep up? It's time to take control of your wellness. On this episode of Wellness Unlocked, we're diving into the key nutrients your body needs for all-day energy and balance. With 100% or more of your daily essential vitamins, plus added chromium to support healthy blood sugar, this is complete wellness in a single soft gel. Join us as we uncover how small changes can make a big impact on your health. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and take the first step toward better health.
Something very important, there is an intrinsic neurotrophic factor that is released via myokines, that is some peptides that we have in our muscle that produce neuromodulation and increase that peptide in the brain to increase the neurocognitive of the brain.
I'm glad you said that. Right, so exercise has an important part to play in the aging brain. As we get older, our gray matter does shrink, we have reduction of synapses, but exercise is shown to actually improve our cognitive functioning.
Totally.
Take some time for yourself or spend some time with the family at Sandy Point Village Hotel. Enjoy our various studio and suite apartments, self-contained with their own kitchenettes and Wi-Fi. We also have our famous 100-foot swimming pool and our beachfront restaurant, the Steak and Lobster Grill. And our location in Crown Point puts us near the center of activity from the nylon pool to the local nightlife. Call us and make your reservations at 639-8533, 389-2378 or email us at sandypointvillagehotel@gmail.com.
And while you may have expected me to return, one of the things that no one really had on their radar was not so much a cabinet reshuffle. Usually when that word is used, it means that portfolios wholesale are traded. But in this case, the Prime Minister did something very interesting. And when I first got wind of it, I think someone sent it to me via WhatsApp. This might have been before the news stories actually came out. And I found it very curious. Responsibilities of the cabinet was shuffled about. Now, not all of the changes seem to be equal, and there are questions with some of them. Because I wouldn't necessarily say, depending on how you look at it, and if you speed read through some of the articles, like one article will kind of point out there are certain amount of ministries that got responsibilities added. And then there was certain amount of ministries that got responsibilities taken away, but nothing was done to replace those responsibilities. So they basically had a net reduction, right? So 10 ministers, 10 ministerial portfolios had expanded responsibilities, but it pointed to minimal to no aspects were removed. So you're looking at the Prime Minister herself, the AG, Homeland Security Minister, the Justice, well, I don't know if I agree with them putting Justice Minister there. Saddam Hussein, the Legal Affairs Ministry, the Public Utilities Ministry, the Finance Ministry, Planning and Labor. They also have Ministry of the People, but to me that seems more like a reduction. But then 8 portfolios, there were major reductions, not necessarily any additions to compensate, with housing, energy and energy industries, agriculture, health, culture, sports, public administration. Now there are a couple that I want to really focus on. The first one being the Prime Minister. It's very interesting. There are 2 things that the Prime Minister has. Well, I'll group them as 2 things. One is its own thing, constitutional reform. And I guess it makes sense. They're very constitutional reform to trust anybody to do it. It's very difficult. Now, of course, all the PNM diehards ain't going to trust Kamala, but I would argue, as the person who was elected, like more than anybody else in the current government, or any government, the Prime Minister, that is the key face of your election campaign. And a lot of the trust and confidence in any government is centered around the Prime Minister. So it makes sense to me. Also, the hope would be, I'll be honest, I don't expect the Prime Minister to be looking at being in the job for the next 15 years. So she is at a unique opportunity where she might be more, because she's also, I believe, beholden to no one within the party. So the unique opportunity is she can actually try to institute long-term positive changes that normally most political parties might not want to even entertain the thought of, because they'll be looking at what will we lose, what advantages, what loopholes, what windows. And then, of course, there's the whole daunting task of trying to get it right. It's potentially very easy to get it wrong, even if you have good intentions. So that also, don't underestimate, fear of failure paralyzes, I think, some of these ministers. Not so much that they have bad intentions. They mean well, they just don't know how to really carry out the job. So the Prime Minister taking on constitutional reform, there's probably a few other guys in there, right, that you would think, if out of this cabinet, who do we want to pilot constitutional reform? Well, the Prime Minister and the AG is probably a good starting point, right? And I don't know necessarily who else you might want to throw into that mix. Of course, the trick is, ideally, you would also have a couple people from the PNM side into that mix, because it's that important. I don't necessarily expect that to happen. I'll say this, if the PNM and the UNC came together for constitutional reform, that will be one of the things, that a sign of a better tomorrow will be so much stronger if we saw that. That'll be one of the biggest, brightest, most beautiful indicators that our future should be trending upwards if things like that could start. But I doubt that could happen, because I have yet to see either side make any meaningful overtures and, more importantly, compromise to facilitate cooperation. Do they need that for constitutional reform? I think they have a 3/5 but not a 2/3 majority. But one of the things that the Prime Minister also has is she has a lot of social programs now moved under her office. And of course, it does somewhat help that Minister Padrath is a minister in the office of the Prime Minister. I do wonder, again, and bear with me, this might seem idealistic and a little bit naive, but I guess you could argue, if there's anyone that you could trust in the current government, it should be the Prime Minister, right? Because it's one thing to say, oh, well, there's corruption in politics. All right, fine. Which means that, generally speaking, there's corruption in cabinet. But one would hope, at the very least, you could have some amount of trust in the Prime Minister. And I do wonder, not that I am afraid of the Prime Minister taking on these programs to do anything in bad faith. Rather, I'm wondering, is she taking on these programs to be under her umbrella because she's basically saying, you know what, I'll safeguard these things. I'm going to take direct control of these things to ensure that nothing could be done to abuse these things, because they exist, we need them to do their work properly, and abuse, not only corruption, takes away from our national resources, but it also undermines these programs and essentially makes them impractical, non-existent, ineffective, unnecessary, you know. And the people who they are meant to serve, they are getting shortchanged. So there's that. Now we go to some of the more, that's just my speculation. Now we go to some of the more interesting things, because I think, I believe MP Marvin Gonzalez, opposition chief whip, he pointed to some of these things, particularly with the Minister of Justice. And this is the quote. So clearly there's more in the proverbial mortar than the pestle. For instance, how come the Minister of Justice isn't responsible for criminal justice? Because he's saying 5 months into office, during which he installed the largest cabinet with many ministers receiving salaries, yet spending more time blogging. Now, I'll say this, I don't know necessarily about the blogging. If it's like Khadija Amin and Julian John saying, oh, look what we did here in this community and that community, I'm okay with that. If it's personal blogging, but there are, to be fair to MP Gonzalez, there are certain ministers, which, to be fair, was also my perception back in the Dr. Keith Rowley cabinet, there are certain ministers that you don't really hear anything about. And you do have to question, is it that they don't know what they're doing, they're too afraid to do anything, they don't have resources to do anything, or they're just there to collect a check and they really don't care? It's hard to tell which one of those is the reasoning for their actions or their lack of visible action. That's visible. He's saying we're now seeing changes in ministerial portfolios, like the finance minister being stripped of key responsibilities in the evaluation division, and other ministers stripped of self-help programs and lands. But one of the ones that I looked at, and I had to be beside myself, is it just me? This doesn't seem right. Because the Minister of Justice, criminal justice and prisons were taken from his portfolio. And now, on one hand, I actually do think it makes sense for prisons to go under Homeland Security. But then, when you look at what's left for the Minister of Justice, he now oversees electronic monitoring. To me, that's a sub-service of prisons. Environmental Commission, Equal Opportunities Commission, Equal Opportunity Tribunal, Tax Appeal Board, Council of Legal Education, Hugh Wooding Law School, instead of the Attorney General. So you got that added, I believe. And the Criminal Injury Compensation Board was taken from Minister Alexander and given to him. But a lot of these things, you could argue, why does this ministry exist at this point? Because as far as I'm aware, the Ministry of Justice, their main job was to deal with issues in the criminal justice system, and if the criminal justice unit, like, I don't know what else he has with regards to at this point, I'm not sure who is responsible for trying to deal with the issues in the criminal justice system, and I guess which would be more like the judiciary and legal affairs and all of that jazz, right? Because the criminal justice unit was taken from him. So now it's just a set of boards and commissions which probably could be under other ministries, right? Tax Appeal Board possibly could be under Finance or Legal Affairs. Council of Legal Education and Hugh Wooding Law School could be, they took it from the Attorney General, but it could go back. Potentially, I do wonder if basically, because so many things were, well, not so many things, but because such a big ticket was given to the AG, perhaps the thought was, well, we need to take some of the responsibilities out. But to me, it almost looks like the Minister of Justice is really just a junior minister in the Ministry of Legal Affairs or the Office of the Attorney General. I don't know how else to put it, right? There's a couple other ones. So as I pointed out, the AG now has the Criminal Justice Unit. The Minister of Homeland Security is now basically in charge of prisons, which, I'll be honest, I guess it was my fault for thinking this, but I just thought that was more natural. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's the internal stuff. I guess you could say, okay, if you have a whole Ministry of Justice, but why have that separation per se? Right? A lot of the union issues, the equipment issues, the logistical issues, the resource issues, the personnel issues would be similar. So why have it in two different ministries and have a lot of redundancy with regards to administration, support staff, and the like? But I guess if you had a criminal justice ministry or Ministry of Justice, you had a criminal justice minister, it made sense. But since you stripped the two big things away, now, one of the other things that I found interesting, and this might be more of a, well, how you view the flavor of it, right? The ministry responsible for lands is no longer the Ministry of Agriculture. It now will be under Legal Affairs. So it's Land and Legal Affairs. So Legal Affairs Minister Saddam Hussein will now be in charge of things like land and surveys, land management, regularization of tenure, housing for squatters, surveys and mapping, valuation, which that came, I believe that came from Finance, Land Settlement Agency, Land Survey Board of TNT, the Estate Management and Business Development Company. Now, to some extent, this does kind of make sense. One of the issues probably is a lot of the legal issues around land, part of it being inheritance, and of course squatting. And if it's squatting on state lands, that's one thing. If it's squatting on private lands, that's another kettle of fish, right? Did it need to be outside, taken away from agriculture? I'm not entirely sure. This could be a sign that agriculture is going to be pushed, and to do that, we need the Minister of Agriculture to not have to worry about these other things that have nothing to do with agriculture. Now, it kind of makes sense. Again, it just all depends on what you want to prioritize, how you want to cluster things, because obviously agriculture needs land, right? But with regards to responsibilities, if we really want to get the whole food production thing started off, try to move to food security, and you want the Minister of Agriculture to focus on that, then perhaps you could say, all right, take all of those land responsibilities. Minister Hussein, you deal with that, you support, because I do believe he's a minister in the Ministry of Agriculture. And you basically support him with these things. We don't need the Minister of Agriculture to be agriculture, land, and fisheries and have direct control. You know, and in fact, you probably need someone else to just sort out the details anyway. Now, what is one of the other things? The Minister of Trade and Investment and Tourism and Health, they got stuff taken away from them. But one of the key things is Ministry of Planning, Economic Affairs and Development. Kennedy Swarat Singh, Minister of Planning. He was given certain responsibilities, social planning and development and monitoring, taking that from the Minister of the People, as well as, is that all? There have been so many changes, I'm trying to keep up. Social planning, development, and monitoring. Now, I guess this might be an admission that the economic needs, it's kind of difficult to say, well, I plan, you control the finances, and you control the programs. And is that really necessary? Now, the flip side is, to what extent did the Minister of Social Development, Vandana Mohit, what has she accomplished? I don't know, right? Minister Swarat Singh is one of the, from my point of view, perceived big hitters or heavyweights in the cabinet. And you could kind of see that he's going to have a lot of responsibilities to right the ship economically. It makes sense that he also now is in charge of social planning, because essentially a lot of that literally is just budget. And you need to have a good handle of, all right, what is our economic goals and how much can we put into these social programs, and then how does that feed back into our financial planning? It's not just in a vacuum where we give you a gift and you be happy or whatever, whatever. We can't afford to necessarily waste money like that anymore, right? So there are a couple other situations, but I found that the land one, the planning ministry, the land ministry moving to legal affairs, so now it's land and legal affairs, the stuff being put under the office of the Prime Minister, and what happens in the Ministry of Justice. Here's the thing. The question is, first of all, has this delayed the budget? That's a fair question. Because I don't know if all of the changes are going to be that natural. I think Minister Alexander basically said, well, you know, this used to all be under national security anyway, so we're just shifting the reporting and the lines of authority responsibilities from one minister to the next. It might not be that big of a deal to put prisons back under Homeland Security. But there are certain other choices where certain things was taken away, certain aspects of land and stuff put under, I believe Saddam Hussein was, let me just make sure, was taken away from, yes, regularization of tender housing for squatters was removed from the housing minister, right? And one would wonder why. Is it to make it more efficient? Now, part of the thing is I think some of these changes is not an admission, as some people have said. Some people are saying it's an admission that there is a dissatisfaction with ministers. And it's easy to assume that for all of the changes. I'm not necessarily going to assume it for all the changes. I don't necessarily think it's a dissatisfaction with the ministers. The problem is, when this cabinet was formed, it wasn't just we get people to fill roles that are pre-existing. They changed the ministries. They didn't just rebrand them, they moved responsibilities around. At the trade ministry, where tourism was, they split national security, and so on and so on. They were trying to make things work better in some respects. In other respects, you could argue, you know, the PNM just do it with junior ministers, but the UNC likes to have more senior ministers, right? Different styles, I guess. One could argue more ministers means that you have more people at a certain level. It might affect motivation, it might affect sense of duty and responsibility. It spreads out the work more, what have you. But the point is they changed it. And this could be not so much an admission that, hey, ministers are not doing the work. This could be an admission that the changes we made were not 100%, you know, working out. So we want to make some more adjustments to the system. But then there's things like the Ministry of Justice, where again, I'm left to wonder, what is it? And also, like the ministries where you took things away from, but you didn't necessarily add things back. So you're not just moving things around, you are in some cases saying, hey, you don't need this, you can't do that, etc., etc., etc. Right? And the list, now like Dr. Rudal Munilal, he got, that was one of the other ones I was supposed to mention. Certain things like power gen and so forth, power generation, was moved from the Ministry of Energy and given to Public Utilities Barry Padarath. And Dr. Munilal basically said, well, things are changing, etc., etc. And I think to some extent, the long and short is, I can't remember the exact phrase that he said, I'm not going to look it up. But it makes sense. What is he doing? It seems like he's spending a lot of time going abroad trying to deal with energy deals. And does he have the wherewithal to deal with local energy production? Meanwhile, there's a Ministry of Public Utilities under which TNTech technically falls under. Shouldn't he just deal with power generation? Doesn't that make more sense? So in this case, yes, his portfolio was reduced, but it could literally also be assigned, similar to what I said with agriculture, where it's like, listen, we need you to be spending time not dealing with the local, whatever, power generation, power gen, the other companies. We don't need that, right? Yes, it's energy, so, you know, try and figure out where the gas coming from that we're going to use, where we're going to buy it from, who we're going to get it from, if we're going to produce it ourselves, whatever. But we need you to be out there trying to settle all of these deals so that we could figure out where we get the revenue to fuel the economy for the next 5 years. We need you to do that. And Minister Padarath, you will just deal with all of the local energy concerns. It makes sense. So there were some things like that where those decisions, I think, they really are trying to further streamline cabinet and get it better. But others, especially the people who you don't really hear from, you don't, listen, at the end of the day, at least you could say with Minister Munilal, look, we kind of see him do some things internationally and give comment and what have you, right? And you know what? And it's also good that, and he doesn't necessarily engage on a lot of the local bacchanal. I haven't necessarily heard him directly be one of those, oh, look what controversial thing he did this week. But there's a lot of other ministers where, like, okay, they got stuff taken away from them. And I'm like, I don't know what they do. I don't. And how many of them really don't know how to be in government and how to do these jobs? Right? And, you know, for some of them, you're kind of thrown into the deep end and it's a sink or swim. And maybe, again, you're limited by budget. But I don't know what the benchmark was. But I think there is some truth to the fact that some of the ministers, she may be looking at them and saying, hey, listen, so I have a problem. The work needs to be done. So somebody had to do the work. And if you're not going to do the work, we'll start to make some changes. And this is the first round. I think Dr. Mohammed, essentially Dr. Shea Mohammed, and he was on AM Prime earlier, they touched on it a little bit, but he also commented to the media. I believe that's basically along the lines of what he was saying. That, look, the train stops for no one, right? We can't wait on you to figure it out. This is an early warning. This is the quote. If you don't believe that I was observing you in the last 6 months, here's your notice. And also, to be fair to the Prime Minister, this might be why there were times when she wasn't as public as I would like. Now, I still think that for major press conferences and announcements, she should have led, because she is the leader. She was elected the leader. I understand whether you like it or not. I don't want to see the government fail, because if the government fails, we have problems. So I don't care what her political affiliation is. If she makes bad decisions, I'll criticize it. But in general, my hopes and prayers is that she succeeds spectacularly, because I would like to live in a better country. Can we at least agree on that? Right. Now, perhaps she was spending a lot of time observing and letting people, hey, you do this press conference and you do that. Let me see what you got. Now, I'm hoping this might be the case. I have no reason to assume it is, right? Because Shane said, I have taken notice of where the weaknesses are. This is what he believes the Prime Minister is thinking. What needs to be realigned? What needs to be fixed? Because we have to take into consideration as well, you win government, 1, you create a cabinet, 2, you have to now focus on the schedules, on what you want, who to hold where, and see how it works in 3 months, in 6 months. That's a good, smart tooling approach. So now as we come to budget now, some people, and this is one of the things, right? Because I do believe somebody said distraction. Somebody said this was a government by distraction. A distraction, Prime Minister. A political commentator who requested anonymity. This is somewhat of a first. You don't necessarily see calls for comment under anonymity. And I think, not that I have an issue with it, I find it interesting. Because there's a part of me, anonymous sources, they have their issues and their negatives. But there's a part of me that perhaps, for the sake of moving forward, assuming that you don't have wajangs that's going to lie out their teeth, because that's the issue with anonymous sources. Since they're anonymous, the onus is technically on the media house to ensure they don't say outright lies and slander that is unproductive and irresponsible. But anyway, an anonymous commentator, this is an avenue that could allow for more discourse, because a lot of people are muzzled by the status quo in various means. They said, okay, this is the Prime Minister's submission that the initial cabinet choices may have followed short, right? And this is something that Dr. Mohammed did not agree with. We are seeing symbols, public symbols, that suggest the formation or the implementation of an inner cabinet, that there is an erosion of confidence in certain ministers to deliver what the Prime Minister expects. Now, and I think Dr. Mohammed, when he spoke on this concept, because I don't know to what extent this is buzzing about, you know, behind the scenes in private narratives, and it's just making its way around the various political circles, he did say this is not like the partnership where there was a cabal that would, you know, be this power base within cabinet that potentially messed up the whole thing, right? We don't have a historical record of exactly how that played out. Everyone will have their own opinion. Is there an inner cabinet? I don't necessarily think there's like an inner clique. I do think, however, there is those that have either, like the AG or the Minister of Planning, a lot of practical experience in order to know how to carry out their job because they've been there and done that before, or people like Minister Alexander in Homeland Security who has experience in this space. So even if he's not going to be quite as well practiced in the ministerial level of that whole entire operation. He's a national security guy, but he was a police. Now he's the minister, right? He's one of the most, if not the most important minister when it comes to dealing with the crime problem. He may not have a perfect grasp on how to do that. He might still have to learn on the job. He has to learn more than, say, the AG, because the AG has experience as AG, he doesn't have experience as minister. But his prior experience as a police officer gives him, at the very least, a strong opinion base to start off, to point the ship. Like, I kind of have an idea about how things are like and what I might want to do, and it might not all work out, but at least I have a plan, or I have an agenda. And what I fear is a lot of the other UNC politicians, they were in opposition and they were there, you know, they did the groundwork on the politics, I get that. But unlike people that came in to help form the cabinet, that came in during the election, who are people who have technical relevant skills in their positions now, like Minister Alexander, like the AG, like the Minister of Planning, and a few others, Minister of Education, right? Unlike those, a lot of the young UNC politicians, to what extent do they have neither government experience nor experience in those areas in other ways to inform their agenda, to give them an opinion, to say, this is what I believe, and this is what I want to see moving forward. Because sometimes in leadership, it's not about getting the perfect solution. It's about committing to a solution, and once a solution isn't bad, once it is generally one of many positive solutions, right, you could achieve something. And part of having a plan is, there is no perfect, this is the first step, this is the second step. It might not be the best first step, but in the context of the plan overall, it might be the best thing to do to get us the best result down the line, right? But to some extent, you just have to commit. You can't whiffle waffle on your plan. You can't change your priorities year after year. You can't be a headless chicken. And people that have a better grasp of what they're doing, depending on their level of experience and expertise, they're going to do more. They're going to commit more. And potentially they might commit to the wrong strategy, but it's better to let them commit to a strategy than to be fence-sitters that don't know where to start, right? And that could be, it's not so much that there's an inner cabinet of a clique that's just around the Prime Minister, we have all the real power and everybody else is just by the way. I think more it's, look, there's work to be done. Who's going to do the work? And it might end up that way. And you might end up where, depending on how it's managed, some of the politicians that are not able to keep up, they're not going to necessarily see, hey, I can't keep up with this and I need to understand my role because I am not able to work in that level. They might think, oh, why am I not, my opinion is not given as much weight as other people's opinions. And that will probably happen more as time goes on. The Prime Minister has to be more and more practical, right? And from what I understand, it's not that she only listens to the big wigs, but at some point, the more and more you might not be willing to give your opinion, you might hesitate and have very indecisive things to say, where you want to hedge your bets. Well, that's not really useful. You're not helping me make a decision. You just tell me the pros and cons and just leaving me out to swim on my own. That's not always what a leader needs to hear. So I think there is that. But then the commentator went on to say she can be described as a distraction Prime Minister who uses the principles of distraction to cover up the inability to deliver a different governance. Well, here's the thing. There's one thing I can't fault the current government for. They're trying to do things differently. And arguably, you needed to do things a little bit different because what we don't want was, or what we didn't want, I would imagine, was the same sort of results as what we got in the last 10 years. And part of that could come from, because I don't think everything that went wrong with the PNM was because they were villains twirling mustaches and saying, how do we steal from the people today? A good chunk of it was inefficiency, lack of oversight or accountability, and part of the inefficiency will come with deficiencies in the system, not just deficiencies in the people doing the job, not just deficiencies in the ministers or the public servants, but deficiencies in the system. So I have no issue with the Prime Minister saying, look, we need to try something different. The private sector, sports teams, various organizations do this all the time. Is this a distraction with regards to the budget? And now to come back to the point that I started off with in the last 10 minutes or so. I don't think it is. I can't say that it's not, right? But it's one of those things that it was thrown out that the PNM was a governmental distraction. And why I found that narrative to be crazy, although sometimes it did seem like it was true, regardless of how crazy it was, when you analyze the situation under the then PNM Dr. Trolley administration, it seemed as though I'm going to distract you from this controversy with this other controversy. And I'm like, bad news to distract me from bad news, how does that help you? And that's why 9 times out of 10, I didn't necessarily buy it. But there was that, 10% of the time where it did feel as though they were trying to distract us from bad news by hitting us with other bad news. I guess the second set maybe was not as bad. But this shift in cabinet responsibilities just before the budget, we assume it's just before the budget, I think that it might actually be prepping us, as I basically implied with the stuff with energy, with the stuff with agriculture, it might be prepping cabinet now, okay, we need to make these changes because the budget is going to be the plan for these things. For this year, this is the plan. And it will be a hell of a thing to make a plan and then shift responsibilities a couple months into it. So as much as some people might say, oh, this is a distraction, or this is just trying to fix or patch something, it's like, well, I think it's trying to further improve the system for the most part, and doing it before the budget makes sense. The key is, if she does an exercise like this before, within the next 8 months or less, that might be a really bad sign of things then not working. Okay, after end there, we have Digger Martin on the line, and then after Digger Martin, hopefully we'll have time to take a break. Digger Martin, good morning. Oh, by the way, ASP Arun not able to join us. Hopefully he'll be able to join us tomorrow. Digger Martin, good morning, you're on here.
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
A couple of issues. We have to come out of the mold of the former PNM government. This is not PNM country, and people must understand when we benchmarking, the last 10 years has been a dismal failure. If it wasn't for the Heritage and Stabilization Fund and the Foreign Reserve, we would have been in a disaster. No, I believe this is what leadership and management is all about, based on the action of the Prime Minister. 6 months into it, she is reviewing her team to see how we are moving forward. One of the first she wanted to do was basically to mitigate crime. And that seems to be going well. I was reading an article by one of the criminologists in one of today's newspaper. Murders have gone down significantly. And if the trend continues, you know what he said? If the trend continues, it will be a 10-year low. What is synonymous with 10 years? The government was a PNM government.
Well,
so
before you go, let me just
say
this though. The murder rate being low technically started under the first state of emergency, whatever that's worth, right? So And that's on the PNM. I'm not necessarily willing to read into it quite just yet to that extent.
Okay, fair enough.
Because,
but
let me just say this too. Also based on the current government's own theories and statements on crime and the reason for the current state of emergency, part of the reason that the murder rate is low could be the very same reason why we have a state of emergency, that there is now a collaboration between gangs rather than outright warfare openly between gangs. So.
Okay, I'm listening to it, but I could clap back at that suggestion.
Right.
The statistics currently shows it is down, significantly down. What is the difference with all of that scenario? A new police service commissioner, a new police commissioner, not service, apparently has the competency, has the skill to drive the TTPS. It's only last night there was a replay of the Joint Select Committee on the day of policing, and it was a skating attack on the then Police Commissioner Stephen Williams. So what I'm saying, her first and her highest priority, we are seeing some fruits. The second thing is, look at her cabinet. She has, as you rightly said, some people who are senior, but she have a lot of young people. In any organization, you have to have succession planning. You have to develop a team. The PNM failed miserably. They stuck with people who were failures. Fitzgerald Hine was a failure and we stuck with him. This is where we are. So that is one thing. The other thing is, the budget will give us a direction where we want to go and how the country is going. Shifting allocations of portfolios within the new ministries. 6 months is a fairly short time to identify what portfolios are put into this ministry. And I think she has done remarkably well within 6 months to identify, hey, it is time for us to make some changes. This might not be the best fit. This might be a better fit. And I believe we are seeing results going forward. And as I said, we can't fit ourselves in a PNM mold. If we continue to fit ourselves in a PNM mold, then we are lost. We buy in cat and bag, as they say, based on the PNM utterances and their governance policy for the last 77% of our independence. The other major issue is, how are we doing the corrective action for all the malfeasance that we are seeing in the courtroom? I, as a taxpayer, have to fund that bill. Are we going to discipline those people who allegedly misbehave in office? We have to look back at the Malcolm Jones. Why did we pull it out? Can that be brought back? A frivolous thing to pull it off. All of these things tell us. I don't believe the dragon glass will fly so easily. I believe we have to, yes, put that as a tangible thing to get down the road, but focus on redesigning where we are to raise additional revenue elsewhere. Look, for example, it's one of the best things I've seen a government do. You saw that prosthetic leg initiative. That was heart-wrenching. How a lot of people who were immobile have a chance. If it's one thing I am putting lots of flag on the current Prime Minister, is that initiative to help people. I'll go and have a nice morning.
Thank you, caller. And I'll just say this. I do want to take a break, so I'll respond to some of the things. You made a good point. I'm not too sure if you fully thought out the implications of what you made, of one of the points you made, or connected all the dots. But you made a good point with the commissioner, which on the surface it's not, but it might actually end up proving to be. But with regards to white-collar crime, I'll just say this. The poor results in prosecuting white-collar crime could be another indicator that the legal foundation of our criminal justice system needs badly to be updated. Because I just find it ridiculous it seems as though we basically cannot prosecute major high-profile cases in this country. It is ridiculous, right? But I'll get more into responding to some of the things you said. There's two things I want to respond to, but we'll take a break, and when we come back, we'll continue, open up the phone lines. Like I said, ASP Arun can join us today. He had his actual job had responsibilities. He could not reschedule. He tried up until the last minute. So we will hopefully see him tomorrow or later on in the week. But until then, take a break, we'll come back, we'll continue the conversation. Stay tuned.
Low energy? Heart concerns? Migraines slowing you down? It's time to take control of your health. Join Wellness Unlocked, the series that brings expert advice and real solutions for a healthier you. In our latest episode, learn how Jameson CoQ10 can help support heart health, boost energy, and even reduce migraines. Get the science, the stories, and the steps to power up your health with CoQ10. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and start your wellness journey today.
Do you need treatment for obesity or any related abdominal procedures? The community hospital now offers minimally invasive laparoscopic surgery done by an American-trained, board-certified surgeon with over 20 years' experience. Give us a call at 235-5479 for more information.
The Community Hospital of Seventh-day Adventist,
When good private health care is affordable.
This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward on our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for, it's called loss and damage. And we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region. Man is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions, and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. And Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada, in spite of the obvious difference in size.
This is Face of Sports, WESN Content Capital. How you felt about the kiss on the lip?
That's the business. I'm not to do with that.
I find that was distasteful.
The national senior team, whether you like it or not, that is the model for all other teams to follow.
I'm assuming that the regional requirement may be a much stricter requirement.
This is not about Pro League and Super League. This is a league run by the Normalization Committee that I'm responsible for.
Nobody expected FIFA to fund this arrangement.
If we don't get a professional attitude towards this, we are doomed for failure.
You break the balance, trip the leg, control the body.
They ain't gonna stand put forever.
Why you want the Chiefs to lose so? Why you want the Chiefs to lose so?
They already have two. Lamar don't
Why?
have.
You're jealous because you know the Chiefs getting closer to the Patriots. Let's go to the last part.
No,
of
not
Let's go to the last part.
I'm back here and talk about another WSN show. Michael Small. Joining us now is the caller from Clarkson Bay. Good morning, caller. You're on the air. Mute the TV. Mute the TV.
Yeah, brother.
Yeah.
Yeah, morning show, morning show.
Morning.
Yeah, Sean, I'm glad the guy just knows that PNM and the UNC is not the same, and he don't want the UNC to go down that road. Because if the UNC has been going down the road with the PNM, we would have never be in this state today. We would not be in this state. You understand? So I'm glad he said that. They always say that UNC and PNM is the same. They are not the same. They never was and they never will be. You understand? No. We had the Prime Minister now moving back on she would, and she's saying that she's in solidarity with the Prime Minister in Venezuela, and that but she still have in mind that she prefer Guaido. I don't know what she really talking about. She in solidarity with Maduro, but she still want Guaido. I don't know what she trying to set this country on, and she continue to lie. You understand? That's the only way, you know, and she lying in front, and not only us, but it's the world seeing that the woman like she not stable minded, and she think that Venezuela is like the people in Trinidad who is just going to say, well, okay, she didn't say that, and she didn't say this. Venezuela is a different kettle of fish. You can't want to kill the people and then come in to tell them, oh, it's not like that, and it's not like this. That is different. You understand, Sean? So people had to start talking to the Prime Minister here. She house is dirty. This house here, Trinidad, is nasty. It stinks. And she's supposed to clean inside house before you go to look at other people's place. You understand? That's how I know it. Clean your house first and then go and look at other people's place. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, caller. There's a couple of things. I will say this though. While yes, I normally would agree with that sentiment, the problem is part of our mess is coming from outside. We got COVID from outside. Right? We get drugs and guns from outside. And no one is saying, maybe it happens, but no one is saying all of those gun and drug smugglers from Grenada or Barbados, right? We know that it goes up the islands. Those couple of cocaine busts in Tobago essentially it was meant to go up the islands. Where does it come from in order for it to go up the islands? Because what's the destination? We know in one case they had a bust all the way up in Portugal, right? Now, Venezuela is responsible in part for some of our mess. One of the reasons why regime change is scary is we already see the instability and the vacuum in proper law enforcement currently in Venezuela. And it potentially could get worse if Venezuela is interfered with irresponsibly and then, you know, abandoned like, say, Afghanistan. Because one could argue, essentially, everything that they tried to institute in Afghanistan more or less was rolled back by the Taliban once the Americans left. Was it right for that to happen or not? It's not that always a clear-cut decision because the money and potential lives lost by Americans to try to stabilize Afghanistan, but stabilize it in what image? So there's multiple ethical debates on things like this. The problem with the Prime Minister is that she had two different messages on one issue. She had the things that she said, and then she had the emotions and energy that she conveyed, right? And the enthusiasm was not entirely in line with the subtlety of the actual words that she chose and spoken positions that she chose on the issue. The whole thing about, yes, take them out, kill, it seems that she's very much highly enthusiastic about American intervention in the region, and it's very difficult for people to agree, understand or agree, because just take the words literally. Don't think I am implying anything there. That just because she's enthusiastic with America on dealing with the drug cartels doesn't mean that she wants regime change. And the oversimplification of the issue, whether rightfully or wrongfully, I'm not saying that it's necessarily wrong to do so, is that you're basically lumping it all in together and not necessarily treating it separately. I do think there is a world where you should treat it separately, even though, yes, one could be a pretext or the the groundwork for the other. But until it happens, I'm not willing to go there yet. We have Trin City on the line. I still have stuff to get through to Diego Martin. Trin City, though, good morning, you're on the air.
Good morning, Sean. Morning to your listeners. Trin City calling.
Morning, morning.
Interesting conversation. People have their points in order. I would support what Diego Martin told you in terms of the factors of that are in place that will help bring down crime. A new police commissioner, fresh eyes, fresh attitude, fresh professional approach. We expect more competent performances or competent approaches from the new ministers of national security, because the last ones were abject failures. Facts on the wall, abject failures. If you're a failure, you're a failure. Not a problem. And yes, the additional part of that is the a state of emergency. So the state of emergency by itself will not solve crime, but there are a lot of things attached to that that can help reduce the crime problem. And we have the historical statistics of when the PNM is in power, crime rises. When somebody else is in charge, crime decreases. Those are the facts of life. As the sky is blue on a sunny day, water is salty when it has salt in it. Those are the facts. Facts. Right? Next thing, foreign policy and the approach to foreign policy. The Prime Minister has to have a competent before I go to that, let me just tell the public the process of governance, meaning the physical processes of governance in Trinidad and Tobago, from the ministries, from the permanent secretary to the operational people come down, are designed to support the PNM. That's a cultural thing. They are designed to support the PNM. Right? Information, research, statistical information, you're doing a budget, you're doing a project in all the various ministries. It was never designed for somebody else to come in and manage. Those processes stand still when other people in power. That is the civil service. That is the culture of the Trinidad and Tobago civil service. Who disagree with me? That is this. I work for 2 state enterprises and I work for a statutory board, and I see it with my own eyes. Facts is facts. Right? Those processes get paralyzed when they have somebody else in power. They get paralyzed. Meaning, you ask technocrats below the PS, we need this, we need that, we need that. They get this, they get that, they get that. But they would not tell you that to interpret this information and to interpret this statistic, this is what you need. You need to understand it with these other reports. They will leave it out. Right? And if you crash, you crash. Because guess what? You're supposed to be here anyway. Whereas when the cousins come into power and they ask for the same information, you need this, and you need that. In addition to what you ask for, this is what you need to understand this better. So all the time, a non-PNM government will always be shooting in the dark. You understand? I challenge anybody to come on here and tell me wrong, because that is what it is. They get paralyzed. Right? And it's paralysis by sabotage and undermining. Right? And is he navigating that? Navigating that is like going to dental school. Right? It's like flipping teeth. That is difficult. That is difficult to navigate. And that's real. I'm telling you, it's real. It's real. Right? Foreign policy. I think the Prime Minister realized that Donald Trump is a kind of unhinged man. His brain going. We've seen it. The way how he addressed the senior military people the other day.
Yeah,
that
but
brain real going.
Yeah,
His
but
brain gone.
he was always like that.
But that man.
I won't agree with you, because that implies what happened to Biden is happening to him, and I don't think it's the same thing.
No. What is happening to
Caller? You're breaking up, caller. Okay, yeah, it broke up and we might have lost the caller. We had to cut the call because I don't know if he was maybe coming back on the end there, if it was just a quirk of the system. We have a list of comments. I don't know if we could put it up on the screen. I don't want to necessarily have to read them all, but there's some interesting parts there. I'm not hearing that China not going to buy Russian oil again. I don't know if I'll believe claims like that. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on YouTube. Unless they have a big fallout, I don't think you could say absolute things like that. But he did say, let's see if the structure of BRICS is solid as they want us to believe. Here's the thing. The G7 is not NATO, right? The EU is not NATO. Military alliances and economic trade agreements and political voting blocs, etc., they're similar, but they're not the same. And at times, they could go off on their own, right? BRICS is an economic trading bloc in a way to counteract Western economies from monopolizing certain things, and also to just try to find their own way, their own markets, whatever. But BRICS was never necessarily guaranteed to be a military alliance, because India looks at China as one of their main threats. India is more than willing to buy Western equipment. They scuttled their initial Su-57 deal and went with the French Rafale. And they might go back to Russian equipment, or they might not. The whole war in Ukraine has made things kind of look eh. South Korea has turned into potentially a new arms exporter. It all depends on if they can meet demand and development costs and so on and so on. So a lot of people want to put BRICS as this thing, and I'm like, why are we making these assumptions? Because that's what they are about BRICS. It's not there yet. It's not there yet. Stop. Now, a couple of things they said. Russia looks like it's going to be thrown on the bus. I'm not sure if it's facts, but it's in the conversation. Well, politically speaking, the position it's in is harder and harder, because the longer things grind out, the sanctions stifle economic development and technological progression. So at some point, you're going to reach the point where Russia's economy is not able to compete technology-wise. We have Trinity back? All right, so let's take down the comments. Let's go. Trinity, welcome back. After I made a comment, we couldn't really make out your response to it and anything else after. So I don't know if you could pick up where at that point, if possible. Caller? Caller, are you there? Caller, hello? All right, caller, it seems as though we have some issues with you on the line. I don't know if you don't realize you're on the air or if the connection is bad. Did we disconnect from the call again? I guess we did. All right, let's put back up the comments. Oh, wait. Mr. Trinity, are you there?
Morning again, Sean. I think I lost signal there for some reason. I was driving when I was talking to you.
Okay, yeah, continue.
I was making the point. That you disagree with the point I made, and that's fine. That's no problem. But in my observation is this, right?
Mm-hmm.
Donald Trump is unhinged. The Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago changed her story after realizing, I think, somebody whispered in her ear, the way in which you're handling this issue with Venezuela is not the correct way. And it's not the correct way, right? We have to understand the history of Venezuela. We have to understand the history of the United States habits of regime change. They are not interested in you. They are not interested in me or well-being. They're interested in other people's resources, and they will change regime to suit themselves. The bloodletting that happens over the years, in the last 60 years with regime change, is untenable, right? And that is a history really Caribbean need to understand. You encourage regime change in Venezuela, you put a $50 million US bounty on Maduro's head. That is something that will encourage regime change and internal unrest. the results of that would be casualties of war because of regime change, because you want regime change for the people oil. We in the Caribbean must understand that because we are the descendants of imperial colonialism. You have to understand that. You have to stick on principle and stop pivoting left, right, and center when things don't go our way. We have just to understand that, right? As you said earlier, part of our problems, Venezuela is responsible for it because it comes from Venezuela because of our open borders. We had a COVID issue. We have guns coming across with drugs to Trinidad and Tobago. That is the failure of of national security. No assets, no fuel, nothing protecting our borders, and those are the facts. So we have to understand what the global issues are, understand what the regional problem is, and understand the problems that we have to fix. It's multifaceted. There's a lot of different things that we have to navigate, that we have to establish, and that we must understand. The best approach is diplomatic relations with your neighbor. You have to like him. You don't have to like Maduro mustache. You don't have to like his two left feet. You don't have to like how he eats trumps and drinks scotch. That is not the issue. The issue is diplomacy. Diplomatic relationship with you. Maybe Kikowi, maybe Mrs. Prasad maybe another prime minister in the future. Who knows, right? Who knows who that might be? And those are the things that you have to understand and that we have to move going forward. Biden was going down mentally. That's fine. So is Trump, right? A mentally unstable person like Trump is more dangerous than a mentally unstable person like Biden. Those are the facts. One you could pardon and live with, one that you definitely should not live with, right? And there's an implosion, we call a civil implosion that is taking place in the United States among the states of ICE and using the military against citizens, and the possibility of deporting U.S. citizens. All that, this is mass confusion. You take that mass confusion and you transport that to Venezuela in all mass. So she has to be clear on what she wants in terms of foreign policy, and she can't be changing her mind today, changing her mind next week, and pivoting and pivoting. Juan Guaido, everybody wants Juan Guaido because Juan Guaido is a Hispanic white wannabe. That's elitism.
I don't know if Guaido
right?
is...
And that is the issue.
I don't know if Guaido's on the table anymore. It's Machado and Gonzalez, not Guaido. I don't think Guaido is really an alternative anymore. The opposition moved on.
No, but right. So things. Well, your last caller mentioned Guaido.
Yeah, I know. I was supposed to bring that up.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Good. So if his name is not on the table, fine, but they go get somebody. So that $50 million bounty on what's his name, on Maduro's head is throwing up a lot of internal interest. $50 million, we could do it. That partner. Serve the country for a method pottage, just like how the corrupt African did from the 1960s into the 1980s. You understand? And that is what regime change is about. That is what imperialism, what European and Western imperialism is about. Regime change for the people's resources. Once we get that clear and we have that in our minds, we must understand that. We locally, we have to read Kwame Nkrumah. We have to read Malcolm X. We have to read George Patton. We have to read about what's his name, Alexander Bustamante. We have to read about Marcus Garvey, Kwame Nkrumah, Thomas Sankara. Once we read those historical figures and we read what they were fighting for, what they were trying to install in Pan-Africanism, in terms of former colonial countries, we have an understanding. Remember, I told you.
Okay, Mr. Trinity, for time, I'm going to have to...
Assassination. Right. Okay, so we talk some more. So you take care.
Thank you, caller. We have San Fernando on the line. So, and then we have to wrap the show shortly. So, Mr. San Fernando, good morning.
Morning, Sean.
Morning.
You hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Now, with respect to the state of emergency and how it has been used to seemingly bring down the amount of criminal activity in the country. Okay, it has affected the the murder rate. That is evidence because it gives the police a little more fighting power to go after those people. And we must not forget Mr. Alexander's accommodation with gangs in Trinidad and Tobago. So it is a testament that the gangs have been affecting the murder rate, and it seems as if this UNC government has gone another way in terms of dealing with the gangs. Now until we have okay, in this state of emergency we have been detaining people. What I have not been seeing, and I can tell you this, is that we have not been detaining the persons that can seriously affect, because this is not about evidence, this is about information. All these detention orders is about information that they have. And the people that are in this country that are money laundering are not being detained. I'm not asking, I'm telling you. If it is that they're serious about this, they would start to detain some of these people and seriously put a dent in criminal activity in this country from that standpoint. The problem is our law enforcement and and judicial system is not aligned and in sync to deal with this problem that we have. That's why this problem has been getting bigger and bigger and bigger, because our law enforcement and the judicial system, they can't deal with the situation, and that is why I hope the government needs to concentrate on this. If they really want to bring this problem to a heel, this crime problem, they have to deal with that. And I see no problem in carrying on the state of emergency for another year, for another 2 years, as a matter of fact. If it is that it is necessary, and I do think it is necessary to give, from the police standpoint, to give the police an edge. Now, that being said, coming up in this budget, I hope they look at the Ministry of Agriculture.
Minister did say they would.
And enforce the the pre-larceny squad, because you can't want to bring down the food bill and you have turmoil in the agriculture sector where farmers are in fear that people are coming and taking the produce and robbing them. We have to beef up that pre-larceny squad to deal with some of these issues. We also have to look at land tenure, and we also, for people that are planting, and we also have to look at people just deciding that I can go and take a piece of land and farm on it. Those things have to be dealt with, and I hope Mr. Ratiram, in addition to Mr. Hussein, can get together and deal with this situation if they really, because what we have to do with agriculture, we have to be able to put things out there that are alternatives that can bring down the food import bill. And in addition to which, the Trinidad and Tobago has to change the way they eat.
The problem with that
I'll
is...
say no more on that for today's show. Have a good day.
We have to go. I'll just say we have more on the line, but the problem with changing where we eat, some of those local foods, we import that too. We have a move on the line. This has to be the last call. Good morning, caller. You on here?
Morning, Sean.
Morning, morning.
To be quick. Sean, Mr. Trincity said something there just now, and I realized that I can't say whether you agree or disagree, but I just want to repeat it.
Yes.
He said quite clearly that when the PNM returns to office, crime increases. I noticed you just stayed quiet. And the thing is, Sean, experts in the professionals in Trinidad and Tobago, the criminologists, the political scientists, none of these persons seems to be aware of that, Sean. A pleb like me, I have noticed that for years. I'm over 70 years. And no one says this. No one is honest and courageous enough to say this publicly. Mr. Trincity just said it. And I want to tell you that I will call back when Karen is there on Wednesday to raise this further, because when I hear people sit on air and say, well, the PNM is a great party, I have serious issues with that, Sean, because I have looked at the PNM all my life, never voted for them, and I have good reasons why. You know, so we need to be more honest in this country and talk certain things clearer and publicly. But I will finish this conversation on Wednesday, Sean. Thank you.
I did have a comment to that. A couple of things. One, the problem I have with saying that, well, at least recently, or crime is done with the UNC. Well, Kamala Bissessa used a state of emergency early on in her terms, both times. And there are similarities, or there sounds to be similarities, in that, and I think to say what you said, while it might be a true correlation, it's not necessarily a full causation. Because again, we could also correlate, well, the PNM started a state of emergency at the start of the year, and the murder rate was reduced then. So I can't just say it's all the UNC. Now, I can't remember, I don't think it was Mr. Doug Martin, but one of the callers did mention the fact that, well, look, the new commissioner, it might have been Mr. Doug Martin, the new commissioner made a change with the way crime fighting works and it's more effective. But the problem is, you could argue, right, we saw that first with Junior Benjamin in the majority of the first SOE when they arrested Ayla. Now, here's the thing. They arrested Ayla, Junior Benjamin comes in, the state of emergency seemingly has some positive change. One could then turn that right back around and say, well, it is the PNM at fault, specifically with regards to the commissioner and the effect that a bad commissioner had on the crime situation of the country. Because they selected Ayla and they stuck by Ayla because they seemingly are so concerned about perception that they don't necessarily always look at practical reality, right? I see we have a comment here. I want to try and get it, depending. Let's take the comment. Some of the things that you don't know are things that no one knows or no one is willing to say. That's why any sort of commentary will always utilize words of, there are certain things we don't know, based on what we know, etc., etc. Because various individuals who might be involved, whether it's energy industries, teachers, public health, policemen, firemen, outside of maybe the unions, they can't speak. Not that they don't want to because they fear for their jobs. They can't because they are outright basically told they can't, and thus have very real practical fears for their jobs. And the politicians don't speak. I don't know if you notice, you don't see a lot of interviews on morning talk shows by politicians on either side, which is very interesting. The opposition doesn't do it. So I'll leave that there. I don't have time to go into that any further. Back to finishing what I was saying. It's not so simple to say, oh, just the UNC is better, the PNM is worse. The PNM has been in charge for longer, so the law of averages state more negative things are going to happen to them. But I think one of the main things recently is the fact that we had this phenomenon where the UNC comes in, they change things. They are potentially trying to solve problems where it upsets the gangs who, instead of killing each other, now they look to threatening the government in whatever capacity. So they call a state of emergency, suppress crime. And to be fair, they don't do things like pick a commissioner of police based on political reasons fully, at the least, right? So it's difficult because there are things to suggest what you all say is true, and then there are things, practical, inconvenient realities and facts that says what you say might not necessarily be true. I'm not willing to just make that assumption that it is true. I will say this, I do think the PNM, one of the things that might be true to the PNM is the complacency on, well, as long as it's gangsters killing gangsters, we don't care. But the problem is that did not work in the last couple of years, as we've seen, when things went way overboard. But again, Hines, was Hines always the Minister of National Security? I think Hines is somewhat of a unique existence. And the challenges in the crime rate now is not necessarily challenging the crime rate 15 years ago. But like I said, there is something to be said to the fact that, well, they had Heinz there and they had Euler there for however long, and that was, by all intents and purposes, a disaster. So you're not wrong to blame the current crime on the current PNM administration. But an observation correlation is not always a thing, right? Using a state of emergency does not mean, well, somehow we are necessarily just better at dealing with crime. You're better at dealing with crime because of the state of emergency. Let's make that very frank. Because if it wasn't the case, then we wouldn't need it, and Mr. Sanders would like to see us still under state of emergency. We have legislative issues, and for the UNC to say we are better at crime than the PNM, I want to see them actually look at the criminal justice system and the criminal law and make improvements there. Now, with regards to Venezuela, I don't think she's adjusting her stance per se. I think a lot of her aggressive tone was based on domestic crime policy and perception, because she had an aggressive tone with regards to domestic policy. It's just that we see America and you want to equate and correlate everything into one big lump thing, and I don't think it's that. Because from the very beginning she said, we're not there for regime change, we're not providing any basis to support any action to regime change. The problem is the tone she used with regards to the enthusiasm on going after the drug smuggling muddied the waters, and she did not craft the subtleties into her message effectively enough to make a clear distinction on her position. So now she's having to do damage control on her aggressive enthusiasm from before. But the content of what she said is not that different. The thing with the bounty, here's my last point. The thing with the bounty, if the bounty causes regime change, what most likely that will look like is not a civil war. It will just be a purge. Think of something like the Night of the Long Knives in Nazi Germany. The SA had 3 million men. Its leader, Ernest Röhm, wanted to absorb the German army, which at the time was limited by law to 100,000 people. So he had like 30 times the amount of men that he directly commanded as an informal paramilitary security organization, arm of the Nazi Party. Well, way outnumbered any other paramilitary arm in the Nazi Party at the time. He was feeling himself, and he was seen as a threat. And they basically conducted a purge that only saw 150 to 200 men getting killed in an organization of 3 million. You deal with the head of the snake, you purge at the top, and you could get a change. So that bounty is not going to cause a civil war, and I don't think so. What it's going to do is it's going to set somebody up to have an incentive to try to do a decapitating strike and just take over things in a relatively bloodless coup. You'll have some Mickey Mouse trials, you'll have some executions, some people will get shot depending the loyal bodyguards or whatever whose fate is tied to Maduro. That's assuming anyone is willing to do it, and enough people are willing to do it, right? There's a chance that yes, if the rest of the leadership in Venezuela is too split over the bounty, that could lead to civil war. But most likely what will happen is someone will politic behind the scenes and cause a purge, and you won't necessarily get a civil war. But that scenario is actually one of the scenarios essentially Dr. Ellis warned against, because it will give the Americans a facsimile of victory, but you're not actually changing anything practically with regards to the situation in Venezuela. So it is what it is. We want Dragon Deal because practical reality, unfortunately, hit the current government in the face. I think that's where they're changing their tune, not necessarily how they're treating with Venezuela per se. There's a lot of subtlety in the Prime Minister's messaging. And what she really needs to do was to have a bit more of a reserved and elegant statement on the matter rather than a continuation of empty dematic. Because that's basically what it is. That's basically what it is. But she limited it to narco-terrorism, but the environment isn't doing that. Because this whole zone of peace is technically, it's forcing the narrative in a situation. And it's ironically, it's encouraging regime change when if you had a different narrative over what the Americans were doing, it could have potentially tempered any thoughts of regime change. Because the real criticisms right now is not regime change. That hasn't happened yet. The real criticisms is the extrajudicial killings in what should be a law enforcement function. That's where the argument should be, not the zone of peace nonsense. Because the zone of peace nonsense is meaningless. But that's just my opinion. All right, we're done here. I'm over time, so thanks to all of the callers and comments. I couldn't get through to every comment from one commenter. We didn't have enough time for that. But hopefully the ASP will be with us later in the week. We get some updates on what's going on with the police situation. I know about the police killings have increased while the murder rate is down. And that's one of the things where I'm not all for the status quo, right? As much as it seems better, I don't necessarily even feel safer from crime per se. With that said, remember your allegiance to the Republic and to each other. Stay safe. Remember to be nice even to people of different political beliefs. We'll see each other tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN